Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and once again it is time for the Monday Q&As. So let's knock this out. And I'm sorry I only had these 16 to do this week. I was reading through them and I picked 16 and I look and there were so many other good questions down the road that I almost feel bad about the ones I picked, because some of the others, it was a tough choice between just looking through there, but I went ahead and went with my first 16. So let's go ahead and knock these out. And yeah, I've even got the green screen in this video. Alright, first question. With your background in endurance, how would you prepare for a spec ops course 3 weeks out? Now, this individual, I had to ask him further. I do know this individual. He is in the British Army, so he's talking about his basic physical fitness testing that's like a 3-week period that they have to go through here in the British military. What I would recommend for something like that, you've got to keep in mind that in the British military testing, they give you like a run-up phase to it. So you actually have a preparation week and you're actually judged based upon the way that you do during that preparation week also. I would keep this very simple. If you want to do some of the events and practice the actual events for specificity of training that you're going to be subjected to, go ahead and do those. But I don't necessarily think it's necessary. And I know he had mentioned he was doing some circuit training, and I wouldn't necessarily recommend the circuit training. I would go with something like just standard heavy powerlifting, barbell movements to keep your basic strength up. Do whatever body weight exercises with high volumes that they're going to test you on, because I think they do some of that, like your chin-ups, your push-ups, sit-ups, things like that. And do lots of backpack running. You need to run every single day with a loaded backpack. If possible, have some days to where you go up and down hills, because that's all the sort of stuff you're going to need. That's the sort of endurance work I would do. Just nice, slow, list cardio with a loaded backpack with some hill runs thrown in there. And I wouldn't necessarily cross-train with circuit training. I would go and just do heavy work to keep your strength up. And obviously, you're not going to be able to do the weight training during the actual week. So that's going to detrain a little bit. So you want to get as strong as humanly possible going into it on the strength training end. So just basic powerlifting with something in the 1 to 3 rep range with a few big heavy compound movements. That's how I would approach it personally, but those loaded runs are going to be everything. All right, next question. Jason, I've heard people say that it is unsafe to foam roll your lower back. Is this true? Thanks. This is subject to a lot of debate. I do understand the argument, and I would say that there may be potentially issues with rolling directly on the spine in the middle. However, you can foam roll the spinal erectors without putting the load directly on the spine itself over the foam roller by loading to the side. You can get the foam roller under just one side of the spinal erectors and do each one unilaterally so that you're not putting any pressure in the foam roller directly across the spine itself, so you can work just the soft tissue on each side. And that's a lot easier to do with one of those smaller rollers, unless you want to get quite a bit of angle shifted to one side or the other when you're using a wider roller. But that's the way to do it if you don't want to take that risk. Now, how risky it is, I think, is subject to debate. But it's one of those things that if there's any risk with it, that you probably don't want to do it just to be safe. But you can still foam roll your lower back on just the soft tissue by offsetting it to one side and just not putting pressure directly on the spine or the vertebrae. All right, next question. Opinion on tattoos for yourself? On others, that does improve a man's standing by having them. What do you think of someone with a tattoo as opposed to another with 10 or more? Oh, I don't know. I've always had mixed views on this. I generally tell people, do whatever makes you happy. If you enjoy tattoos and that's the way you want to artistically express yourself, go for it. But you should be aware of your own culture, where you place them, and how likely it is to affect your ability later in life to get really high-paying jobs, things like that. Like, don't get tattoos on your neck or your face unless you know for a fact you're never going to go into any line of work where it's going to negatively affect you. Try to limit them to areas that you can cover purely for professional reasons in the long term. But for a lot of people, they know that their life choices in their career aren't going to be affected by it. They want to do it for their own artistic expression. And if that happens to be you, then knock yourself out. Go for it. I've considered getting tattoos. I don't have any. I've considered getting some on my back sooner or later. But I've never gotten around to it and never really made the decision to do so. Now, as far as people doing them for aesthetic purposes, they can definitely ruin a physique in a lot of ways, and so you need to plan that out ahead of time if you're going to be someone who's doing some sort of physique-oriented competition. You do need to strategically place those tattoos, particularly if you're going to get large ones, so that they enhance your physique rather than detract or distract away from it. And people always ask me, what do I think of them on women? I think it really depends on the girl and the tattoos. I think some women can look very, very good, very sexy with a large amount of tattoos. And I think other women, they don't get them placed. They just don't look good on them the way they do them. And I think it can detract from their appearance. So in all honesty, I can go either direction on that sort of thing for women, because it really depends on the woman and just the way that she carries herself with the tattoos and how she has them done. I mean, I've seen women who they just look terrible on them, and I've seen other women who have tons of tattoos who look very sexy. So it's really hard to call. It just so depends on the individual. And again, I would say, irrespective of what you're going to do there, I used to have a friend who was a tattoo artist, and I've heard horror stories. Make sure that you get a skilled artist, and that you get one who knows what they're doing. If something like that, don't skimp on it and get something done cheaply, because you're going to be wearing it for life. The money is worth it to hire a competent artist. All right, next question. Have you ever met a real-time pimp / pimped girls yourself? Admittedly, your dark side leaves me intrigued. Yeah, I don't talk about my dark side a lot, and I know that's why there's some confusion there. I don't think of it as a true dark side. I do have a clandestine past. A lot of people have tried to pull background checks on me, including some people big in the industry, and they've been shocked at how little information they can get. I have spent most of my life off the grid. However, would I say that the things I've done in my life would ever get me in trouble legally or with my own government? No. And no, I don't have any use for human trafficking or sex slaves and things like that. Although, yes, I have come across some of this down in Central America. I have seen some cases of this sort of thing, but it's not something I would have ever gotten involved with myself or ever approved of. I just think it's funny that someone would ask me that. There's definitely some confusion as to my own past, and that's okay. I don't mind there being some confusion there, because I don't put it out there for everyone to know. All right, next question. In Sweden, we currently have a huge increase in active raw powerlifters, while geared lifting is on the decline. That's true. I've met a lot of Swedish powerlifters. The sport seems to be really growing in the Scandinavian countries. How is it in the UK, and where do you see powerlifting in the next 5 to 10 years worldwide? Do you think raw powerlifting continue to grow while geared lifting will decline? Or do you think this is just a phase and geared lifting will have a big comeback? I think geared powerlifting is going to stay about where it is right now in terms of the number of people who do it. However, I see raw powerlifting and powerlifting in general growing as a result of raw powerlifting becoming more popular, and large response due to the internet. A number of people out there actually promoting it, putting it out there, making it interesting again. So it's getting a larger following. I'm seeing more and more people at meets. Meets are getting really big, and they're mostly raw competitors. So it seems like the geared isn't going to grow, and it's understandable why geared powerlifting doesn't grow. It's definitely not something that most fans want to see. It's not something that anyone on a budget wants to just jump in and get involved in, because of the expenses of the gear and the fact that it doesn't always fit if you change body weight at all, and you're having to buy new stuff all the time unless you want to stay at the same size and body weight. And I think raw powerlifting itself is what's going to make powerlifting grow. I think it's becoming more popular, and I think that's going to continue to be the case, largely due to the internet. And I'm even seeing it become more and more popular among women. I'm seeing a lot of women jump into raw powerlifting lately, particularly over here in the UK, but also in the US as well. So it comes as no surprise to me that you're kind of seeing the same trend over in Sweden. I can see that because it seems to be a trend through the entire West. I can't speak to the East, but I can say in the West it's a growing trend in general. But it's probably going to be a fringe sport forever. It's never going to be in the Olympics. All right, next question. Dear Jason, you previously stated that the less aroused someone is during their workout, the faster they can recover for the next workout. Well, that's a hypothetical. At least I believe that is what you said. Apologies if I'm wrong. My question is, would it be a better decision to not listen to loud music during workouts or ingest caffeine before workouts for the sake of not overreaching more than you need to? Personally, I enjoy my music while working out and would miss it if it were gone. Thank you. I would say this is a concept I partially ascribe to. I don't know if I embrace it fully. I like the idea behind it. I've noticed it myself, anecdotally. One expert who has written quite a bit about this would be Matt Perryman, and if you guys go check out his book, Squat Every Day, it will give you some better insight into that. He does have quite good credentials and a lot of experience coaching, and he follows this line of thought. And this is one of the reasons I'm against pre-workouts, and this is one of the things I tell guys of when I am in the off season and I want to do very, very high frequency training. I don't listen to Slayer and all my hard music. I start jamming Slayer and everything as I'm in meet prep, getting close to a meet. And obviously you guys see at my meets the type of music I have playing. But yeah, I think that your music needs to be based around that. If you're going to try to squat and deadlift every day, play music that you enjoy that's just upbeat, but nothing that really gets you angry. That's the thing that you need to avoid. You need to avoid the hard gangster rap. You need to avoid the speed metal. The stuff like that. Keep the music a little lighter and upbeat and enjoyable. And yeah, definitely, I mean, if you're a regular coffee drinker your entire life, pre-workout caffeine in the form of coffee is probably perfectly fine. I always do that myself. But again, the same issue you run into with the pre-workouts. If you're overly aroused or stimulated from your training, it may very well reduce the recovery time, and it can reduce the frequency at which you can train again, which isn't ideal for someone who's trying to maximize strength gains. So that's the whole idea behind it. So be leery of those things and just assess those on a case-by-case basis. But people like Matt Perryman would tell you that, yeah, stims are out, and blasting Slayer is probably out also if you want to train at a really high frequency and make the most of it in terms of your recovery. All right, next question. Is there any way to measure or find out how genetically gifted you are for powerlifting? Thanks. And this is going to segue into the last question in part one also, because they're very similar questions in a way. Can you tell if you are genetically gifted? You go in and you train, because people forget where you start doesn't always affect where you finish, because there's a lot going on with dormant genes and genes that turn on and off and epigenetics and everything when it comes to training, that some people start at a much more advanced point than others, but they gain slower. And the other people, once they get a year or so into training, then all those codons and things start activating in their genes, and dormant genes start becoming active, and then all of a sudden they have amazing genetics. So the best way to tell is to go train specifically for powerlifting for a year, assess how well you're doing, and then go train again for another year, and then see where you're at, and look at what your Wilks score and thing is compared to people who compete, and that will tell you a tremendous amount about your genetic potential. Something like powerlifting, you don't know until you've actually trained specifically for it for a year or two how good your actual genetic potential is, and see where you're at that point. You don't base it upon where you are at the start. And that's my advice there. So let's jump into that last question, because in a way it's a bit similar. Hi Jason, I really enjoy your content, especially regarding powerlifting. I'm interested in getting into powerlifting, but I am 100% sure I do not wish to ever partake in PEDs, notwithstanding whiskey. Since you have stated before that there is no such thing as a natty, well, that's not quite what I've stated. Even in tested feds, am I ever likely to do well or place at meets? Let's assume for the sake of argument that I have average genetics and take on a decent diet and training regime. Well, if you have average genetics, all the drugs in the world are still not going to make you an amazing power lifter. Welcome to the real world. People don't like to hear that, but that's true. However, here's what I would point out. Don't assume, go back to that first question, do not assume that you have average genetics for powerlifting until you get out there and actually do it. Because you cannot assess your genetic potential in the long term early on. Get up there and train hard for it for a couple years and see where you're at and assess it from there and keep pushing and get wherever you can go. You don't necessarily need to set limits on yourself. Now, if you know that you don't have amazing genetics and you know you're never going to use drugs for powerlifting, you can forget being a top lifter in the world. But that doesn't mean that you can't do well in competitions. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't train to win. And it doesn't mean that you shouldn't focus on getting better every single year, because you can still do those things without drugs. It doesn't require drugs. It doesn't require amazing genetics to improve every single year for the next 10 years. And if anybody gets better for 10 years straight, they're still going to be doing pretty well at the end of the day. So I wouldn't worry about those things. And powerlifting is one of those sports that, again, until you just get in there and do it, and see where you're at. You don't know where your potential is going to be. And remember, the internet inflates that. Most people have these weird assumptions that the top 1% of powerlifters represent the norm. And there are guys you see on the internet that you could go to 20 meets and never meet anybody as good as they are. There are people on YouTube who you could go to 10 to 20 powerlifting meets and not meet a single person who can match them on Wilk score. Put that in perspective. Keep in mind, you see people on the internet who say what a terrible powerlifter I am, and I always place near the top of the field at every meet I go to, even at the national and international events now. So put that in perspective. You don't have to be as good as you think you do to actually place well at meets. Alright guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it has been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time in part 2.